Have you ever found yourself looking at a map and wondering why some places seem so empty? Get ready to have your perception of geography and history turned upside down, because what I'm about to tell you now about Cambodia and Laos goes far beyond simple population numbers. Many believe that poverty or lack of resources are the only reasons, but what if I told you that the true cause of this emptiness is a story so brutal and counterintuitive that few even dare to imagine it? If you're tired of superficial explanations and seek to unravel the most shocking and profound curiosities of our planet, which will give you a mental clarity most will never have, then stick with me. You're about to discover the truth behind one of Asia's greatest demographic mysteries, and the reward is an understanding that will transform your worldview forever. If you think a country's history begins with its independence, you've got another thing coming. Often, the seeds of the future, whether for prosperity or challenges, are planted much earlier, during times of domination and external influence. In the case of Cambodia and Laos, this story goes back to the French Indochina era, a period that, without a doubt, left deep marks on the political and social geography of these nations. It's one of those historical curiosities that make us see how the past shapes the present in ways we don't always perceive. Well, French colonization, while it brought some infrastructure and modernization, also imposed artificial borders, exploited resources, and, most importantly, suppressed the development of strong national institutions and identities. When independence finally arrived, these countries found themselves with fragile structures, dependent economies, and fragmented societies, a true, heavy legacy that would hinder any attempt at autonomous progress. The geography of the region, with its vast rural areas and low urbanization, also contributed to this dynamic. This colonial heritage, my friend, is a crucial factor in understanding why these nations, throughout the 20th century, would face such monumental challenges. The lack of a solid foundation for development, coupled with regional tensions and the effervescence of the Cold War, created fertile ground for conflicts and instabilities that would come to plague the region. The geographical curiosities about Indochina, with its strategic position, only added to the complexity of this scenario, setting the stage for the approaching storms. You know, history has a peculiar way of showing us that when a conflict ignites, it rarely stays confined to its protagonists. And that's exactly what happened with the Vietnam War. While the world focused on the clash between North and South Vietnam and the global powers, Cambodia and Laos, discrete neighbors, became secondary stages for unimaginable brutality. It was a real woe for the sovereignty of these nations, a bloodshed that, for a long time, remained in the shadows, one of those tragic curiosities most people don't know about. These countries' neutrality was ignored, and their territories were used as supply routes and hideouts for Vietnamese forces, which, in turn, provoked a massive military response from the United States. Millions of tons of bombs were dropped on the Laotian and Cambodian geography, transforming lush landscapes into minefields and craters. It's as if the very earth screamed the horror of that period, a brutal reminder of how external conflicts can devastate entire nations, leaving scars that last for generations. This secret bombing and the instability generated by the neighboring war deeply destabilized the social and political structures of Cambodia and Laos. Populations were displaced, economies were destroyed, and the ground became fertile for the emergence of radical and violent regimes. The geographical curiosities of the region, with its dense forests and mountainous terrains, which once served as refuge, now became silent accomplices to a tragedy that set the stage for even darker chapters in the history of these peoples. You know, my friend, history shows us that sometimes horror doesn't come from outside, but is born from within, from ideologies that promise a paradise and deliver a hell. And that's exactly what happened in Cambodia, right after the Vietnam War, with the rise of the Khmer Rouge. Under Pol Pot's leadership, the country plunged into one of the most brutal and systematic genocides in history, an insane attempt to create a utopian agrarian society, which resulted in the death of millions of its own citizens. It's one of those dark curiosities of humanity that makes us question man's capacity for cruelty. The Khmer Rouge regime sought to eradicate everything it considered Western or bourgeois, including intellectuals, professionals, ethnic and religious minorities. Cities were emptied, families were separated, and forced labor in the fields became the norm. Cambodia's geography, with its vast rural areas, was transformed into a gigantic extermination camp, where hunger, disease, and summary execution were tools of control. It was a "oh my God" that the world took time to comprehend, a deafening silence that hung over the killing fields. This human and social devastation left deep scars that still affect Cambodia today. The loss of an entire generation of intellectuals and leaders, the destruction of infrastructure, and the breakdown of civil society created a vacuum that immensely hindered the country's recovery. The geographical curiosities about the nation, once focused on its ancient temples, now included the sad reality of a people struggling to rise from such a traumatic past, setting the stage to understand how Laos also suffered, but in a different way. You know, my friend, while Cambodia was living through the horror of the Khmer Rouge, Laos, its neighbor, faced a different, but equally devastating, tragedy. Few know this, but Laos holds the grim record of being the most heavily bombed nation in history, per capita. During the Vietnam War, the United States dropped over 2 million tons of bombs on its territory, in an attempt to cut Vietnamese supply routes. It's one of those historical curiosities that make us question the true extent of conflicts and their hidden impacts. Imagine the geography of a country, with its dense forests and valleys, being transformed into a lunar landscape of craters and unexploded ordnance. Millions of bombs, many of them cluster bombs, were scattered across the ground, making vast areas uninhabitable and dangerous. Even decades later, these remnants of war continue to claim lives, hindering agricultural development and infrastructure construction. It's an explosive legacy that stifles progress and keeps the population at constant risk, a grim reminder of the past. This legacy of unexploded bombs is one of the main reasons why large swathes of Laos remain empty or underdeveloped. The geographical curiosities of the country, with its natural beauty, are overshadowed by the reality that walking through certain areas can be a death sentence. The removal of these artifacts is a slow and dangerous process, requiring resources and time, and directly impacting the country's ability to develop and its population to prosper, paving the way to understand the economic and geographical challenges that still persist. You know, my friend, history shows us that even after overcoming the horrors of war and genocide, a nation's journey towards development is full of obstacles, and many of them are intrinsically linked to its own geography. Both Cambodia and Laos are predominantly rural countries, with a large part of their populations living in hard-to-reach areas, with precarious infrastructure and dependence on subsistence agriculture. It's one of those curiosities that makes us think how terrain can be such a decisive factor in a people's destiny. The lack of sea access, for example, is a significant challenge for Laos, making international trade more expensive and complex. Cambodia, although it has sea access, faces the reality of still developing port and road infrastructure. Furthermore, both countries have vast areas of forests and mountains, which, though beautiful, hinder the construction of roads, schools, and hospitals, limiting connectivity and access to basic services. The rugged geography is a constant impediment. These geographical challenges directly translate into economic difficulties. Attracting foreign investment, diversifying the economy, and creating quality jobs become Herculean tasks when infrastructure is deficient and the workforce often lacks qualifications. It's a vicious cycle that keeps large portions of the population in vulnerable situations, and the geographical curiosities about these countries help us understand why, even with the end of conflicts, the demographic and economic emptiness still persists, setting the stage for reflection on the weight of recent history. You know, my friend, history isn't just a record of the past, it's a weight we carry, a burden that shapes a nation's present and future. For Cambodia and Laos, decades of conflict, genocide, and bombings have left such deep scars that recovery is a slow, painful, and obstacle-ridden process. It's like trying to rebuild a house on rubble, where each brick needs to be carefully placed while the ground still shakes. It's one of those curiosities that makes us admire human resilience, but also lament the slowness of healing. Despite reconstruction efforts and recent economic growth, both countries still face monumental challenges. Corruption, the lack of solid democratic institutions, and dependence on foreign aid and investment are just some of the hurdles. The political and social geography of these countries has been so disfigured that building a prosperous future requires more than just resources. It demands time, patience, and an unwavering will to overcome the past. This slow recovery, my friend, is one of the reasons why the perception of emptiness still persists. It's not just about population numbers, but about a void of opportunities, infrastructure, and human capital that was decimated. The geographical curiosities of these countries, with their vast, sparsely populated areas, are a direct reflection of a traumatic past that still echoes in the present, setting the stage for a deeper reflection on what this emptiness truly means. You know, my friend, when we look at Cambodia and Laos today, the perception that they are absurdly empty doesn't just refer to low population density in certain areas. It's an emptiness that echoes the tragedies of the past, the loss of entire generations, and the difficulty of filling gaps left by decades of conflict and underdevelopment. It's one of those curiosities that makes us reflect on how history can, literally, empty a country, not just of people, but of potential and opportunities. Despite all the natural beauty and rich cultural heritage these countries possess, their human geography still bears the marks of a brutal past. Rural areas, often untouched and lush, are also the most affected by a lack of infrastructure and the remnants of war, which hinders the return and settlement of populations. It's a paradox. The same landscape that attracts tourists is the one that, for years, was a stage for suffering and still today imposes challenges on the lives of its inhabitants. However, this emptiness can also be seen as a space for the future, fertile ground for growth and reconstruction. The geographical curiosities of these countries, with their natural resources and strategic location, still hold immense potential. The question is how to fill this void sustainably, honoring the past, but looking forward to a future where the resilience of these peoples can finally flourish in fullness. So, my friend, together we've unraveled the deep layers that explain the emptiness of Cambodia and Laos, revealing geographical and historical curiosities that shape the destiny of nations. You've seen how human resilience can overcome unthinkable tragedies. But now, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you merely be surprised, or will you use it to look at your own life with that same depth? Think about it. If countries can rise from such devastation, what's stopping you from overcoming your own challenges? True wisdom lies in applying what you learn. If this journey has inspired you to go beyond the obvious, then you're on the right path. Don't let this flame die out. To continue exploring the world's curiosities and enhancing your vision, do yourself a favor, leave your like on this content, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The next step in this adventure of knowledge is waiting for you.